Welcome back, everyone. Hello, I'm Maureen Walton. I hope you enjoyed lunch and you had an opportunity to network. There's also some little boxes in the back there for people that are looking for snacks for later. It's really important to make new connections here, and I'm excited now to present two more outstanding presentations to close out this afternoon. We'll begin with Dr. Rebeccah Sokol, an Associate Professor of Social Work at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. Dr. Sokol's work focuses on developing school-based programs to identify student and caregiver needs with research that evaluates strategies to promote child and adolescent safety and addresses the fundamental cause of violence today. She will share her latest findings for a project in that space. And following Dr. Sokol's presentation, we will welcome two researchers to set the stage for a shared presentation. Dr. Jillian Baker is a postdoctoral research fellow at the U of M Survey Research Center. Her research sits at the intersection of women's health, aging and injury, and violence exposure. She completed her doctoral training in epidemiology at the University of Michigan School of Public Health. And joining her is Dr. Avinash Chandran, a quantitative epidemiologist and chief science officer at the Daedalus Center, where he leads national research programs. I apologize if I misspoke on that. Where he leads national research programs on athlete health and injury surveillance. His work focuses on aligning epidemiological methods with multidisciplinary data sources to better understand how physical activity and sport influence injury, risk, and health outcomes. Together, Dr. Baker and Dr. Chandran will present their work on linking injury and function across the life course in women, drawing from findings with a study of women from across the nation. So as always, please hold your questions till the end. And now we will open the floor to Dr. Sokol.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I am so excited to be here. I'm Rebeccah Sokol, and today I'll be presenting on developing a school-based program to identify student and caregiver needs. This is one of the core projects for the center, so of course I'd like to begin with just acknowledgments to our funders. And then also recognize the study team. So as a lot of people have already discussed today, science doesn't happen with one person alone. It really takes a team of people dedicated to a common cause. And so for this specific project, we have both the University of Michigan research team, but then also our school partners who are really providing so much input on what is actually going to work in this study context. So huge implementation partners. And so none of this work could happen without any of these people. And I'd like to start out with a bit of a rationale for this project. So this is something that has actually been in the works since 2020. This is a partnership that I began with the school community right around the time that the COVID-19 pandemics had started to settle in. And the school really was identifying, we have an issue here. We have some basic needs within our school community that just aren't being met, and that's showing up in, some learning loss, some absenteeism, some problems. And so we came in as a research team, we're like, we would love to, try to help you identify some solutions to this. And one thing that they were dealing with at the time too were quite a few threats of violence within the school. And with my research focused on social work and social and material needs, I really come to these issues of youth violence and school violence, really thinking about how do we improve youth safety, and specifically, how do we do that by addressing some of the root determinants of school violence and of youth violence and of youth safety. Some of those root determinants really being social factors, such as poverty, /wealth, food insecurity, insecurity, etc. And of course, these inequities and the social risk factors that pop up, they exist because, and they're really sustained through a lot of these structural barriers, including intergenerational poverty and wealth, racism, and so forth. And so we were thinking, as a research team, but then also with our school community partners, what if we were able to somehow connect families to resources to address some of these social factors. So this doesn't, of course, address the structural determinants that continue to produce and reproduce these social and material risk factors, but maybe there is something that we can do in the realm of just addressing people's immediate needs. And so that's how we came to write this research grant focused on a school-based system to connect families to community resources, specifically tailored to this school community, which is a predominantly Latinx school community. And we were thinking that, hopefully, developing and evaluating this system can lead to an overall reduction in youth violence at the school. And so, as a core project, this of course has 3 aims, and we haven't officially launched the project yet. That is coming in August. But I want to focus first on this first aim in the few minutes that I have today, really working to adapt a social needs screening and resource linkage system, Conexión, for use in a school system that predominantly serves Latinx students. A little bit about the community partner and the setting, a little bit more. It's a charter middle school and high school in Detroit, Michigan. This is Conexión. This is the setting in which Conexión will be happening. It's Cesar Chavez Academy. It serves predominantly Latinx students, and the students' age range from about 12 to 17 years old. And what is our overall theory of change here? What do we think? What do we hope is going to happen? Well, we really expect that Conexión will help families circumvent some of the structural barriers to positive social factors, leading to more positive social factors and thereby reducing youth violence overall. And this is really, the conceptual model for this project is really driven by the Commission on Social Determinants of Health conceptual framework from the World Health Organization. And so, as I alluded to, I'll mostly focus on aim 1, which is to adapt a social needs screening and resource linkage system, Conexión, for use in a school system that predominantly serves Latinx students. And so if any of you are in healthcare settings, it's really, really common nowadays for parents, specifically in the pediatric setting, but also in other settings as well, to fill out a social needs screener before a visit and identify things like food insecurity, housing insecurity, employment issues. And then within that visit, the practitioner might refer that specific family to a social worker to help make some of those connections. And the research in this area is actually quite robust, that these types of systems are able to have real benefits for families and for children and reduce things such as child maltreatment and the like. And so the idea here for this specific project is, what if we use a similar system, but what if we adapt that for the school setting? Because almost every child goes to some sort of school. And so what we are doing here is using the adapted approach to use the models that have been really popular and really successful in different healthcare settings and move that into a school setting. And so we've already engaged in steps 1 through 4 through some preliminary work. Again, this work has been ongoing since 2020, and so we've been able to do some surveys with the school community, et cetera, to do those first 4 steps of the adapted approach. And we're now working with a preliminary intervention manual, a naive intervention manual, that coming up in August, we will be starting to solicit feedback from our topical experts. Of course, those topical experts being the people who are situated in the school community and know best what is and what isn't going to work. And so what does this initial draft of the intervention look like? Well, in terms of eligibility, who's going to be eligible to receive the intervention? These are going to be students and parents who complete a 15-minute online questionnaire that screens for various material needs. That's going to be what the parent is completing. So these material needs are things like food insecurity, housing instability. And then students are going to complete a different behavioral and psychosocial needs assessment, things that have to do with isolation, mental health, stress, anxiety, and the like. And then to be eligible to receive the intervention, dyads, these student caregiver dyads, would need to have identified 1 or more of these needs within those different domains. And hopefully, we're hoping to recruit 330 dyads and randomize 165 to each arm. What does the actual intervention look like? It's a 2-part intervention. So the first part is an initial resource linkage outreach that would last about 60 minutes. And this would be where a resource navigator, who is a very trusted member of the community, would contact students and or their caregivers separately to discuss any identified needs. They would follow some pre-designed flow sheets for each need to guide the different discussions, use motivational interviewing to then connect and provide warm handoffs to different resources, either within the school or within the community. And then after that initial outreach call, the resource navigator would follow up with students and with their caregivers about a few weeks later to just see how that warm handoff went, to see, hey, we talked about this resource, or we talked about this strategy in our last call. Were you able to connect to this resource? How did that resource go? Did you find that helpful? Or, you said you were going to start implementing this strategy. How did that go? Do you need any additional support, or what additional support might you need to engage in that activity a little bit more? And then, so that would be the entire intervention package, is these 2 resource linkages, and then we would eventually evaluate it in the next EAM to see what is the effect of this intervention on different youth outcomes that we care about, specifically youth victimization and youth violence perpetration. So what are we doing right now? Right now, we're really working to continue to sustain and build our relationship with our school partners. And so we're meeting with our school team at a quarterly pace on site. And food is really, really helpful for these events. So we're always making sure that we're coming with something to offer them. If it's only food, then it's only food, but hopefully we're giving them a little bit more than that. We've also been tabling at parent-teacher conferences so that the school community, so that students and their parents start to recognize who we are. We become more familiar faces there so that, when we come in a couple years to recruit people to join our study, we're not some complete stranger. And then we're also attending some other school events. So this is a school that has a lot of different community engagement events, lots of different opportunities to engage people, engage families, engage community members, and all things that are happening within the school. And so our research team, we're working to show up to those, again, just to make sure people are starting to become a little bit more familiar with our faces and why we're there. And as I said, our study's already started is going to be officially starting this past summer, but this is all the work and relationship building that we've been doing up to this point. And so hopefully it's starting us off on a good foot as we really start to engage with this project wholeheartedly. And with that, I would like to thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to answering any questions in a bit.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sokol. That was so interesting. Next, we have Drs. Baker and Dr. Chandran to come up. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I'd like to say it's really wonderful to be here and rounding out an incredible lineup of speakers. Congrats to everyone who's presented and to the IPC team for a wonderful symposium. So my name is Dr. Jillian Baker. The doctor is very new, so I'm getting used to it. And I am presenting with my colleague, Dr. Avinash Chandran, on some work that we have been doing to develop a tool to look into early life injury and physical activity history. And like Dr. Sokol's work, this is a preview. Let's see. Go back one. This is a preview of work that is in development, and we'll begin data collection in a couple months. So first, to talk about some rationale behind this work, between the leadership team and the Injury Prevention Center, we have a desire between all of us to understand how injury history, how physical activity history can affect trajectories of aging. The other PI on this work is Dr. Carrie Carvin-Gutierrez, who heads up the Center for Life Course Epidemiology and Aging Research. So we really want to think about what's going to set people up for great health later in life. And we believe on this team that injury history and physical activity in that early life period is a way to set up better health, or something that can strongly affect health in later life. Our goal for this work was to develop a survey tool to collect consistent and high quality data on injury and physical activity history in early life. And that can be linked with the study of women's health across the nation, which I'll tell you about in a bit, to understand how injury and physical activity in early life affect health, chronic conditions in later life. So the Study of Women's Health Across the Nation, or SWAN, is a longitudinal cohort study I've been lucky to work with for the past 5 years. It started 30 years ago with a group of over 3,000 women across the country to study the menopausal transition. Michigan is one of 7 sites. We started with over 500 women, and I believe nearly half of them are still participating even 30 years later. So this slide is meant to tell you all the depth and breadth of data that SWAN has been able to collect through the years. So we've had 18 study visits worth of data collecting everything from physical function to different biomarkers like hormones and inflammation. And we are able to harmonize the data that we are going to collect through this tool with all of this, the year's worth of data. And so to illustrate what we might gather from a participant, we can think of someone who might have had an injury, let's say an ACL tear, while skiing when they were 18, and maybe that affects their physical activity patterns. But then they, maybe 10 years later, see a marathon, they get really inspired to start running, but then they hit their 30s and they don't warm up properly before a rec league soccer game and tear a muscle. And so all of those things could affect what their physical function looks like in midlife, what their chronic condition risk looks like later. And we can compare an experience like this to someone who didn't have an injury like that or who had a different pattern of physical activity. So again, the thinking behind this is we don't come into midlife as blank slates. We are strongly affected by exposures that happen before we enter midlife. And SWAN has done a tremendous job of mapping midlife to older adult trajectories of health. And so we're going to come in here and add to what that early life experiences looked like. The last thing I'll mention before I turn it over to Avinash is that this work is not easy. We are contending with long recall, differential recall based on severity of injury or repetition of physical activity patterns, things like that. But we've tried to be really thoughtful about how we design the survey instrument to account for factors like these, again, with this goal of gathering high quality and consistent data on early life physical activity and injury history. And now I will turn it over to Avinash.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. So great to be here. Really, congratulations to the IPC and the team. And as an outsider coming in, really, really nice to see all the amazing work that's being done at the IPC and by the support of the IPC. So thank you again for having me here. So as Jillian sort of mentioned, over nearly 3 decades since its initiation, SWAN has amassed really a tremendous wealth of longitudinal data, right, on these women spanning multiple health domains. So it's only intuitive to sort of suggest that a cohort like this with decades of rigorous, repeated measurements on health and function represent a unique opportunity for us to examine questions related to injury. And the idea really for us was to leverage this existing infrastructure, this rich longitudinal resource, and layer onto it exposure data that SWAN may not have been originally designed to capture, but that we believe is really critical for plugging gaps related to our understanding of physical functioning trajectories later in life. Yeah. So, as you can sort of see on the left side of the slide there, where we've outlined our broad measurement approach, we've effectively kind of proposed going back in time, if you will, asking these women to recall injuries sustained earlier in life, whether they ever sustained an injury, the number of injuries, and then for those that met a predetermined sort of threshold of severity, we wanted to capture details on age of incidence, body parts involved, mechanism of injury, and so on. And following on from that thread, you can see really how this retrospective measurement then links up quite nicely with existing longitudinal SWAN data. So the vision was really for us to connect what happened before SWAN began to what SWAN has been measuring ever since its inception in the 90s. And with all of that in mind, there's of course central ideas and hypotheses sort of driving our work as well. And as you can imagine, and as Jillian alluded to a little bit, it's that early life injuries may directly impact physical dysfunction during aging and effect. but also affect rather health-promoting behaviors, thereby modifying physical health trajectories in later life as well. And to kind of address those hypotheses, we propose these two aims that were ultimately, which again, Jillian alluded to, which was ultimately in this project that was ultimately funded by the IPC. And the first was really the instrument development piece, and the second was more of an epidemiological analysis itself to determine potential associations between life course history and injury history and late life physical health limitations within the Michigan Swan cohort. Hopefully there we go. So here you can see a bit more detail on the scope of the injuries that we're trying to capture and the principles guiding how we built the instrument itself. So on the left side, I trust, you'll see what I'll refer to as sort of an adapted severity spectrum based loosely on Heinrich's safety triangle, which of course many of you are likely to be familiar with. The key point being that we're not trying to capture everything. We're deliberately sort of focusing or targeting the middle rung of that pyramid, non-catastrophic musculoskeletal and brain injuries. And the rationale here is that these type of injuries are common enough to be prevalent in the population, but severe enough to propagate a signal with regards to health trajectories over time. Now on the right side, you'll notice some of the core design principles that we've anchored the instrument on. And as you'll see, we've deliberately anchored on items related to functional limitations rather than clinical diagnoses alone. And we've also kind of built in life milestone cues, so things like graduations, marriages, major historical events, really to, again, help participants situate injuries in time. Going into it a bit more detail, and sorry for the pixelation there, the instrument itself is sort of organized into 7 distinct domains. We start with an introduction and screening section that identifies which domains are even relevant for a given participant. And from there, the instrument branches into specific categories. And for each reported event within any of these, we collect a consistent set of data elements. And on top, or on the left rather, you can see that we try to capture timing of injury, mechanism, now it's gone, the setting, anatomical location, and clinical diagnosis if possible. And on the bottom of that, you could have seen that we also try to capture functional limitations, type of medical care sought, treatment received, and any long-term sort of persisting effects post 6 months. Okay. So this should give you a sense of where we are in this process and where we're headed. Hopefully we'll be back next year. Starting on the left, again, we completed instrument development over the summer and fall of last year. And that involved all of the foundational work needed to arrive at a comprehensive draft of the Life IQ. We've also since moved through, many thanks to our colleagues at Michigan, through IRB and study preparation. And so now looking into this spring and the summer, we're moving into recruitment and data collection, administering Life IQ within the Michigan Swan cohort here. And maybe keeping that in mind, also want to mention what we've outlined at the bottom, which is gone now, in terms of where we're planning next steps. And that really represents systematic validation efforts that we're proposing. In fact, we've got an R6133 under review now with many folks from the audience, part of the research team. And what we're trying to do is focus on reliability, establishing reliability, validity, and measurement equivalence of the instrument, and also quite keen on developing short form of the instrument and release open source infrastructure around both forms of the instrument. Aim 3 of that proposal then addresses some of the aspects germane to our central hypothesis as well. So all that to say that this pilot work is really positioned to lay the groundwork for much larger and much more rigorous, hopefully, validation efforts and hopefully uptake of the Life IQ. And with that, I definitely want to acknowledge the efforts of our great team, both here as well as at the Daedalus Center, that have been really vital in driving this, keeping this work moving forward. So thank you very much all again for the invite, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. It's exciting to see the upcoming projects that are in the early stages of being conducted, and hopefully we'll have more findings next year. It's still really exciting to see sort of cutting edge research that's happening in these other areas. So now we're going to open it up for questions.
Thanks for both of those presentations. I have something for Dr. Sokol. I'm just really curious about the current context and working with the families that you're working with, and ICE and fear of detention, and then just the services that are available. So I was curious about the warm handoff, and figured you could answer all of those vague areas for me.
Yeah, it's a great question, especially for the times. And there's a few different ways we were trying to address this as a research team. So originally we were thinking that resource navigator might be a School of Social Work student, and we're continuing to revisit that. That was actually originally something that the school partners wanted, and we're continuing to revisit that conversation with them and think through, okay, who do we really want this resource navigator to be? Maybe people would feel more comfortable with it being a fellow parent or something like that. So that is one way we're dealing with it. We're also being very careful about the type of data that we're collecting, and so we're not asking anything that we don't want to know the answer to. And then we are also building out a resource guide. So we're using Airtable, which I love Airtable. If you haven't used it before, it's a great organizational software, online interface, application, whatever you want to call it. And we're starting to catalog every type of resource that exists within about 5 to 10 miles of the school. And in there, we're trying to collect specific information about the requirements that somebody might need to have in order to be eligible for services, or even the types of questions that that service provider might ask of a potential family to receive services. And we developed that about a year ago, and over the next year we're going to kind of go through that with a fine-tooth comb, likely reach out to all of these services that are cataloged in this catalog, specifically to see, you know, what is the actual process that it might look like for a potential applicant or potential client. So lots of things to consider, and that's not even the full spectrum of things to be considering, but just kind of a little taste of, you know, how we're trying to address some of the real sensitivities in this area.
Thank you. That was a great question. Other questions?
This is for Dr. Sokol too. So I'm just wondering, with your intervention, kind of like what the difference is between something that you all would be offering versus what, like, let's say, I'm assuming that they have school social workers there already embedded at the school, and how, I don't know, like how you're integrating it so that it's not seen as some like extractive type, I don't know. I just coming in and kind of, I know that you're doing a lot of work kind of leading up to, but could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the school system definitely does have school social workers embedded within it. In conversations with the school leadership, they want to make sure that anybody employed by the school system is not implementing the intervention for HR reasons. But the idea is this could we're really trying to detail everything needed to implement this intervention. And so the idea is at the end of it, if the school liked it and wanted to continue on with this practice, they could take the intervention manual and work it into their school social workers kind of, you know, scope of practice. But as far as the research study, the school team is very clear that they didn't want us to have oversight over a school employee, which I think makes sense. But hopefully and sustainably, if the school likes it, they can work it into the scope of practice of the school social worker.
That was a great question. It's always challenging in community-engaged research and thinking through those boundaries. Yes.
Hi, Lily Klein from Michigan State. This is for Dr. Chandran and Baker. So I'm curious, first of all, love that you guys are looking at women's health. I think that's really important right now. I'm kind of curious because you're looking at injury and health outcomes. What other maybe social determinants of health are you looking at within populations, and how do you think that might sort of influence what you're looking at as far as long-term health outcomes and engaging in physical activity?
Thank you for that great question. We are not capturing anything new in this particular survey, but as I mentioned, SWAN has a wealth of data over 30 years now. So some of the factors that SWAN has looked into in the past would include things like perceived financial stability. SWAN collected some neighborhood level data more recently. Insurance status would be one. What else? We have a lot of social variables as well to think about, social support. Also, I think maybe like number of dependents. I think a lot of the SWAN participants are maybe they are the person that family members beyond direct children, for example, are relying on. So I would say that SWAN has considered some of these social and structural variables that can influence things that we'll be capturing, especially, the neighborhood level factors. And I think that, again, the neighborhood level it's kind of newer in SWAN to be thinking about that, probably within the past 10 years, I would say. And so I'd say there's growing interest too, and even like taking advantage of things like Google Street View to look at neighborhood characteristics, and that might influence things like physical activity, physical function. So I am certain that I am missing like many, but it's absolutely a consideration and something that we'll be thinking about as we're looking at the data.
Just to add to that as well, so one of the sort of motivating rationale behind the study itself was trying to understand how, or acknowledging that these outcomes that we consider as endpoints are part of dynamic systems, right? So what we want to do, and as Jillian mentioned, there's quite a breadth of data captured as part of SWAN, including physical activity and post-midlife medical adjudications, which can validate sort of injury data as well post their recruitment into the study. So what we're trying to do is layer on context such that we can better elucidate the nature of those dynamic systems, which then potentially predicate the outcomes that we're seeing in their later life. So it's as much as it is about, I would say, this study itself and the measurements we're making in this study, but as much about the richness of SWAN itself and what it's collected over 30 years.
Thank you. Great question. Other questions?
Thanks, Taylor. Hey, guys. Doug Weeb here again. And Jillian and Chandran, Avinash, sorry. Dr. Baker, you mentioned location just now, and zip code is such a strong predictor of so very many things related to what Dr. Goldstick was talking about. Does SWAN have, ideally, zip code? I mean, there's a way better ideal. Do they have county? Do they have zip code?
Yes.
That's geography, but also for injury, it's been around for 30 years, and not that much of the research world has thought about injury the way we have. Do they explicitly ask about injury, or is there a chance for you to embed questions as the next generation of people doing this work?
Exactly.
And supplement what they're doing?
Yes. I'll answer the second question first while it's fresh. So there has been limited data capture on injury in the entire SWAN cohort. So as I mentioned, Michigan is one of 7 sites across the country. And I would say falls has been the most consistently collected injury. That collected variables like the result of the fall, the circumstances around the fall. And then if a woman had a fracture, circumstances around the fracture would be captured. But I think, as Avinash mentioned, it would be, depending on how this work goes and the quality of data we are capturing, I think it would be very cool to roll it out among the larger SWAN cohort, and then also to think about this as a tool in other cohorts of aging and other cohorts of whether it's women's health or really anyone to think about life course injury history. To answer your first question, yes, SWAN has collected geocoded residential information throughout the study. One of the limiting factors is that within each site, it is fairly homogeneous in terms of in terms of like where people were living. And so there's a lot of between site differences. And so that's like an inherent limitation, but there is this residential history that, again, people are starting to think about how can we incorporate neighborhood level factors to think about how that might affect a person's health over time. So, yeah.
Other questions? All right, want to just make sure everybody has an opportunity. All right, in that case, I will introduce back Nicole Burnside, our fearless leader. I want to thank all of our speakers for these amazing presentations in these hot topic areas, and so thank you so much.